The highway looks harmless until you learn how many never made it home. For decades, this stretch of Texas marsh has swallowed young women without a sound, their last footsteps fading into grass that seems to move with memory. People drive past it every day without knowing they're crossing a graveyard built by chance, by predators, and by silence. This place doesn't just hold secrets, it keeps them. Welcome to Shadow Tales. It began the way tragedies often do, quietly, without warning, in moments that felt too ordinary to ever become part of a crime story. The first girl disappeared after leaving a friend's house, walking along a stretch of road she had traveled hundreds of times. She told her friend she'd call when she got home. She never did. At first, no one panicked. Maybe she stopped to chat with someone she knew. Maybe she'd lost track of time. But as the sun went down and the hours stretched on, worry settled across her home like a shadow that refused to move. Her parents called hospitals, friends, neighbors, every possible place except the one that would eventually hold the answer. When the police arrived, they treated the case like they treated many teenage disappearances, as a runaway, or a misunderstanding, or a temporary break from home. Posters went up, her picture appeared on bulletin boards and telephone poles. People kept an eye out, but days slipped into weeks, and the fields remained silent. Then another girl vanished. This time she'd stepped outside to make a short phone call, telling her mother she'd be back in just a few minutes. But minutes passed, then hours, and her mother stood in the doorway long after dark, watching the empty road with a fear she didn't yet have words for. Her disappearance sparked a frantic search. Neighbors, volunteers, and officers combed the ditches, the dirt roads, and the wide-open land that stretched endlessly, in every direction. The marsh swallowed their footsteps. The tall grass erased their paths. Nothing appeared, not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, just silence. The silence didn't break until hunters, weeks later, stumbled across remains hidden in overgrown brush. The discovery tore through the community. And when another body was found months afterward, different girl, same kind of shallow, careless grave, the pattern no one wanted to see began to take shape. Parents who had once felt safe letting their children walk down the road now watched them from windows with uneasy eyes. The field, once just a part of the landscape, suddenly felt like a living thing, a thing that took and hid and refused to give back. People didn't want to believe there was something sinister at work, but as the third disappearance mirrored the first two, the denial thinned. Something was happening here, something that fed off isolation, off routine, off the simple trust of girls who had no reason to fear their everyday surroundings. The scariest part was how normal everything seemed. No witnesses, no screams, no strange vehicles reported. The girls walked into their day like any other, and vanished as if the air itself had learned how to swallow them. It was a disappearance without spectacle, without chaos, without warning. And that was what chilled people the most. By the time the first cluster of disappearances ended, the community understood what investigators had hesitated to admit. These cases weren't random. The land hadn't just hidden one tragedy, it was hiding many. The killing fields had begun to form their grim identity, and everyone living along that stretch of highway felt the first stirrings of fear that would grow for decades to come. As more girls went missing, the map of the region began to resemble something bleak and undeniable. Each new disappearance added another red pin, another point on a line that seemed to stretch almost perfectly along Interstate 45. The pattern wasn't obvious at first, not until the cases were laid out side by side. But once families and search teams started comparing notes, the geographic rhythm became impossible to ignore. Parents met each other for the first time in police stations and parking lots, standing over photocopied flyers and faded snapshots of their daughters. They didn't know one another, but grief made them speak the same language. They traded details no one else seemed to listen to. My daughter vanished near the highway too. Ours was last seen walking past the gas station. She said she'd be home in 10 minutes. Each story echoed the one before it. But when they looked to law enforcement, they were met with hesitation. Officers in one jurisdiction didn't share information with those in another. County lines became invisible barriers that kept clues from converging. One investigator would insist a girl ran away. Another would insist there was no connection between disappearances. A third would quietly admit that something felt off. But with no solid evidence, he couldn't say it publicly. Meanwhile, the land continued to work against them. The fields themselves were a puzzle with no edges. Tall grass swallowed footprints within hours. Heavy rain washed away tire marks and fibers. The marsh concealed any trace of struggle deeper than the surface could reveal. Even dogs trained for search and rescue struggled here. The mix of mud, water, and brush confused their senses. By the time remains were found, if they were found, months or years had passed. The fields were not just a dumping ground. They were an accomplice. Families began driving the row, Ute themselves, tracing the last known movements of their daughters. They noticed the convenience stores with broken cameras, the isolated shortcuts, the empty stretches of highway where a scream would dissolve into the wind. They noticed the same feeling settling in their bones, a cold, instinctive understanding that someone knew this territory better than anyone searching through it. Rumors seeped into the everyday conversations of small-town life. Women spoke about strange cars lingering near schools. Teenagers shared stories about men offering rides. Someone would mention seeing headlights parked deep in the brush at night, but no one ever knew who they belonged to. Some stories were exaggerations, others honest fears, but all of them contributed to the growing sense of danger clinging to the region. Every parent began to warn their children differently. Don't hitchhike, don't walk alone, don't stop on the highway. These weren't suggestions. They were survival rules. And yet, the disappearances continued. No surveillance footage captured anything. No eyewitness accounts surfaced at the right time. Whoever was hunting among the fields understood opportunity like an instinct, striking at moments when no one was watching. By the end of the decade, the term killing fields began surfacing in hushed conversations, whispered by parents, repeated by locals, and slowly picked up by reporters who sensed a story far larger and darker than any single case. The map no longer looked like an unfortunate coincidence. It looked like a pattern carved across the Texas landscape, one that would haunt the region for years to come. As the cases mounted and the pattern grew clearer, investigators began to focus on the only thing left to examine: the men who lived in the shadows of the killing fields. Not one man, not one suspect, but an unsettling list of individuals whose lives intersected with violence, opportunity, and those lonely Texas backroads. Each suspect carried their own darkness, their own story, their own proximity to the marshland where so many girls had vanished. There was the mechanic, a man known in the community for his temper and the way he watched young girls a little too closely. He lived near the fields, close enough that some parents whispered his name long before police ever knocked on his door. His past hid accusations of assault and moments of rage that made neighbors uneasy. When questioned, he gave calm, measured answers that didn't clear him but didn't condemn him either. Without evidence, suspicion remained suspended in air, a shadow without a shape. Then there was the drifter. He came and went as he pleased, living in temporary shelters and old trailers along the highway. He rarely spoke, rarely stayed anywhere long enough for anyone to truly know him. Some people swore they saw him near the convenience stores where girls were last seen. Others claimed he lingered around abandoned lots, watching, waiting. By the time investigators tried to track him down, he had vanished, leaving behind nothing but rumors and the fading memory of his presence. Another man became a figure of interest because he worked deep in the fields themselves, a laborer familiar with every hidden turn, every dirt road that twisted away from the main highway. He knew the marsh like a second home, and while many saw him as harmless, some remembered unsettling comments he made or the way he sometimes followed girls with his eyes. But nothing about him tied to a specific crime. Nothing solid, nothing that could withstand scrutiny in a courtroom. Confessions came from strangers who weren't even in Texas at the time. Jailhouse informants traded false stories for favors. Suspects lied, denied, changed timelines, then restored them. The truth slipped through investigators' fingers like water, because the chilling reality was becoming unavoidable. No single suspect matched every case. For years, investigators insisted on looking for one man, a serial killer who stalked I-45 with precision. But as more evidence trickled in, a different picture emerged. Multiple killers, multiple motives, multiple opportunities. The killing fields, with their isolation and their endless terrain, had not been the hunting ground of one predator, but a stage shared by several, who likely never knew of each other's existence. A terrifying coincidence born from vulnerability, landscape, and time. The fields themselves made the distinctions blur. One offender left bodies in similar spots to another. Weather stripped away the differences in method. Remains decayed too quickly to preserve specifics. And every time investigators believed they were closing in on a breakthrough, the land swallowed the trail again. Families heard the list of suspects and felt no comfort. Knowing that multiple men may have hunted the same area at the same time deepened the wound. It meant the danger wasn't contained. It was scattered. It meant evil here wasn't a single face that could be recognized, but many. By the end of the investigation's early chapters, the map of suspects was just as crowded as the map of victims, and the grim understanding settled like a weight across the community. The fields hadn't hidden just one monster. They had hidden an entire history of them. Heil investigators hunted shadows, and suspects slipped through the cracks. The families of the missing refused to let their daughters become quiet statistics. If law enforcement couldn't connect the dots, then these mothers would draw the lines themselves. Their grief did not weaken them. It hardened into resolve, into an unrelenting drive to make someone, anyone, listen. And soon, their homes began to transform into something far from ordinary. Living rooms turned into command centers. Kitchen tables became cluttered with maps, photocopies of police reports, newspaper clippings, and hand-scribbled notes that tracked every clue, every suspect, every rumor. There were mothers who stayed awake at night tracing the same routes their daughters once walked, hoping that maybe, in the darkness, they would sense something everyone else had missed. There were fathers who drove mile after mile along I-45, stopping at abandoned lots, old motels, and forgotten back roads, imagining every possible scenario. These families carried a kind of determination that law enforcement couldn't replicate, a motivation rooted not in duty, but in love, heartbreak, and the refusal to accept silence. The families formed bonds with one another, bonds forged from shared nightmares. They gathered in community halls, at vigils, in parking lots after speaking to detectives, comparing notes the way investigators should have done from the beginning. They saw patterns before police admitted they existed. They connected disappearances that crossed county lines long before any official map reflected it. Their collective pain became a collective voice. And as years passed, that voice slowly grew louder. While the cases stagnated, science did not. Technology crept forward, quietly, steadily, until it became powerful enough to bring the past into the present. DNA testing improved. Forensic techniques advanced. Evidence once dismissed as useless suddenly became valuable again. Cold case detectives, younger, more determined, less bound by the assumptions of the past, inherited boxes of dusty files and began reopening them with fresh eyes. They found strands of hair mislabeled in bags, clothing preserved in poor conditions but still intact enough to test, bone fragments stored away because the technology at the time could not identify them. Now, decades later, these pieces became pathways to answers. Some families heard the phone call they had been waiting for, though waiting hardly captured the truth. They had been fighting for it. That call brought clarity, but clarity didn't always bring peace. Learning what happened, learning where a daughter had been left, or how long she had been missing before being found, those details reopened wounds even as they offered closure. But closure is a complicated word. It comforts some, devastates others, and leaves many suspended between acceptance and anger. Other families, still searching, watch these breakthroughs with a mix of hope and dread. Hope that their cases might be next. Dread that the answers would hurt more than the questions. Some mothers carried the belief that their daughters were still alive somewhere. Others feared that the land had taken them long ago, but prayed for the chance to bring them home. Throughout all of this, one truth grew painfully clear. The families were the reason these cases stayed alive. Their persistence forced authorities to reconsider old evidence. Their pressure brought attention that authorities had let fade. Their grief reshaped it into the narrative of the killing fields, turning it from an unsolved mystery into a decades-long fight for justice. And as the years stretched on, these families never allowed the land, or the people, or the world to forget the daughters it had taken. Even with breakthroughs, arrests, and slow-moving justice, the Texas killing fields remain what they have always been, a stretch of land that holds more stories than it has ever revealed. Some mysteries cracked open under the pressure of persistence and science, but many more remain sealed beneath layers of mud, time, and silence. The fields stretch outward in every direction, unbothered, untouched by the decades of sorrow they have witnessed. To anyone driving past, they look like any other piece of Texas. Wild grass swaying in the wind, patches of marsh shimmering under the sun, an endless horizon that feels almost peaceful. But for those who know the truth, that serenity is deceptive. Locals who grew up with the legend of the killing fields carry an uneasy familiarity with the place. They know which backroads feel wrong after sunset. They know the stories that hang in the air like humidity, stories of headlights appearing where they shouldn't, of screams mistaken for the cry of an animal, of shadows moving just beyond the edge of vision. These aren't ghost tales meant to scare children. They're memories etched into the collective history of communities that spent decades searching, fearing, and mourning. Investigators who return to the cases often describe the land as stubborn. Evidence disappears faster here. Weather works against them. Time seems to move differently, slower in some places, faster in others, as if the fields themselves refuse to let anyone fully grasp what they've seen. Every few years, new cold case teams revisit the files, hoping modern techniques might uncover what previous generations couldn't. Some find clues that change the trajectory of an investigation. Others come up empty, facing the same maddening barrier their predecessors did. The land gave nothing back. Families still drive the route sometimes, even after decades have passed. They roll down their windows and let the humid air in, imagining their daughter's last moments, where they walked, where they turned, where someone may have stopped them. They visit the memorials built in honor of the victims, simple wooden crosses dotted along the roadside, each representing a life that never got to finish its story. Some families leave flowers, others leave letters. A few sit quietly in their cars, staring at the grass and wondering if answers lie just a few feet beneath it. Over time, documentaries, books, and news stories have tried to make sense of the killing fields. They explore suspects, patterns, failures, and breakthroughs. But even the most detailed accounts cannot fully capture the enormity of what happened here. Because the killing fields are not just a crime scene, they are a landscape of generational grief. Every unsolved case is a wound that refuses to close. Every new discovery is a reminder of how much remains hidden. The frightening truth is that the land did not choose victims. It did not lure predators. It simply existed, vast, unnoticed, and empty enough for evil to move freely without interruption. And as long as the fields remain untouched, their silence will echo with the stories of the young women whose lives ended too soon. The unanswered questions linger like fog over the marsh. Who took them? Who else did we overlook? How many more are waiting to be found? The killing fields stand as a brutal testament to the consequences of isolation, opportunity, and the failure to see patterns soon enough. And even today, long after the first red pin was placed on the map, the land holds its secrets tightly, reminding everyone who passes through that some places remember tragedy more clearly than they remember peace. The Texas killing fields remain a place where answers slip into the silence, where stories linger in the tall grass, and where the past refuses to rest. But here on Shadow Tales, we remember every name, every family, every truth buried beneath the soil. If you want to walk deeper into the dark corners of unsolved history, you're in the right place. Welcome to Shadow Tales, where the shadows speak. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comments below, and share your thoughts on tonight's case. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, the shadows are always closer than they appear.